The frost did not simply lie on the ground west of Minsk. It possessed it. It crusted every blade of dead grass, turned mud into iron, and made the morning quiet brittle enough to shatter under the weight of bootsteps. When the sun finally pushed pale gold through the birch trees, it struck a dark, hulking shape in the field, an armored silhouette half buried in frozen earth and steam ghosts. A Soviet 34, model 1941. Intact. Abandoned only hours before, a half-track idled nearby, its engine breathing white mist. A team in grey wool greatcoats and black field caps approached like men entering a cathedral. They were not infantry now. They were witnesses. Rumours of this new Soviet tank had trickled through Panzer regiments for months, stories whispered by forward observers and shaken gunners. Sloped armour, diesel engine, monstrous tracks, tails of shells bouncing like pebbles off its nose. Now one sat before them, real, scarred, but unbroken. Hauptmann Otto Rehfeld, artillery officer attached to Army Group Centre, was the first to touch it. He removed a glove and pressed bare fingers against the glacis. The metal stung with cold. He tapped it with his knuckle, then with the steel heel of his pencil. A clear, confident ring answered. "So it is true," he murmured. Not just angle, thickness too. Beside him, Feldwebel Ernst Kolbe, a veteran test driver on loan from the armoured school at Putlos, squinted at the wide tracks. "Look at those shoes," he said. "Wide as snowshoes, and spaced for mud. They built it for this country, not parade grounds." A third man hung back civilian coat, round spectacles, a notebook already open. Dippel. Ing. Friedrich Mahler, engineer from Maschinenfabrik Augsburg-Nürnberg, seconded to Wappruf 6, the Army's ordnance office. He had designed steel presses for commercial locomotives before the war, then armour plates after it began. Now he studied enemy machines with the wary fascination of someone admiring a rival's masterpiece. He stepped forward and traced the turret line with his gloved thumb. "Two-man turret," he observed quietly. "Look how cramped. Loader and commander are the same man. Crude periscope. Welding. Rough. Efficient, but rough." He looked like a man reading an unfamiliar language, understanding enough to fear what he did not yet understand. Rehfeld crouched at the front plate, looking up the glacis plane. 60 degrees, he guessed, perhaps close. His breath fogged the steel. Imagine a pack shell striking here at 100 meters. What angle does it strike the plate? What energy must it carry? He ran numbers in his head, lips moving. This is more than clever. This is design with intent. Kolbe had already climbed onto the hull. He yanked at the turret hatch, grunting when it resisted. With a final wrench, it clanged open, releasing a stale, oily breath that smelled of diesel, shell smoke, and wool. He disappeared inside, boots scraping metal as he lowered himself into the fighting compartment. Silence, then a muffled curse. Tight in here, driver sits low seat almost on the hull floor, transmission housing forward, good view slit, crude but strong. More scraping. Turret basket is non-existent. You stand on the hull. Primitive, but no fragile parts for grenades to catch. Mahler nodded. Fewer machining hours, less precision required, simpler bearings. This turret could be welded by an apprentice. He did not say it with contempt. He said it with the tone of a man who suddenly understood the mathematics of mass production. Rehfeld tapped the glacis again. 45 millimeters, sloped, equivalent perhaps to double that. His breath floated upward like ghosts rising. A rifle squad lingered a few paces away, stamping their feet for warmth. They had been the first to encounter the Soviet tank at dawn, a brief, violent skirmish. The 34 had burst from mist like a myth, gun barking, its tracks shredding the earth. A lucky shot from a 47mm anti-tank gun had struck the left track, shearing pins and freezing the vehicle where it stood. The crew had bailed, firing pistols as they fled into the trees. One lay nearby still, face iced in death, wool coat dusted with frost. The German soldiers eyed the tank with a mix of awe and resentment. Armor was supposed to belong to them. They were the masters of mechanized war, so they had believed. Kolbe climbed back out, face smudged with grease. Engines there, big, smells like diesel. Mahler's head lifted sharply. Diesel? If true, that is remarkable. We built gasoline engines for tanks for a reason. Power per weight. But diesel means safety, range, fuel economy, fire resistance. Heavier block, though, requires aluminum alloy. His brow furrowed. How many of these do they have? Rehfeld exhaled slowly. More than a few. Reports at Smolensk, at Yelnya, now here. He glanced south, where a pair of ruined Panzer IIIs sat blackened beside a hedgerow. Too many. A low rumble approached. A recovery half-track and a platoon of engineers trudged into view. Their lieutenant saluted briefly. Orders from Corps headquarters. Tow it to the road. Command wants it shipped to Kummersdorf as soon as possible. He eyed the tank with something like wariness. Never seen one like this. Ugly beast. Kolbe slapped the hull affectionately. Ugly. It is beautiful, beautiful like a hammer. Mahler scribbled notes. Wide tracks. Simple suspension, no delicate idlers, no small bogies to clog with mud, and that armour slope elegant in function, brutal in form. Yes, a hammer. Rehfeld looked across the frozen field to where their own machines waited, narrow-tracked, clean-lined, refined. He felt a twinge of doubt, sharp as the morning air. A hammer, yes, and perhaps we have brought rapiers to a blacksmith's fight. The engineers hooked thick chains to towing lugs. Metal rang. The 34 shifted, groaning like something waking unwillingly. As the half-track strained, tracks churning frozen soil, the Soviet tank rolled free inch by inch, its armor gleaming dull silver under the rising sun. Mahler watched it move, expression unreadable. If they can make one, he said softly, they can make 10. If they can make 10, they can make 1,000. He looked at the weld seams again, rough but fast. And they will. Rehfeld nodded grimly. Our factories craft instruments, theirs forge weapons. Behind them, breath steaming, the rifle squad followed the moving tank, like men following a prophet they did not understand. The 34's engine was silent, but the idea of it roared loud as artillery. Brute power, crude brilliance, simplicity turned strategic. In the distance, ravens croaked over the frozen fields of Belarus, as if reciting a prayer for the future dead. No one spoke again until the tank reached the road. Then Kolbe, wiping oil from his hands, said what all had begun to think. "This is not just a machine," he whispered. "It is a warning." And the frost held its breath, listening. The rail flat car clanked into the proving ground yard at Kummersdorf on a grey morning soaked in damp mist. The smell of wet pine and coal smoke hung heavy. The 34, mud still frozen to its hull from Belarus, sat chained to steel beams like a captured animal. Its sloped plates were streaked with thawing ice, rivulets tracing welded seams. The Soviets had built a machine that looked carved, not assembled. Waiting for it stood a cluster of figures in Feldgrau greatcoats and civilian overcoats, officers with notebooks, engineers with slide rules, and a tall colonel with a monocle gleaming like a shard of ice. General Major Friedrich von Grohn, Wapruf 6 liaison, inspected the machine with a hunter's eye. Beside him, Friedrich Mahler felt the cold bite through his gloves as he touched the glacis once more. 1 month since Minsk, yet the shock had not softened. Around him, mechanics prepared cutting torches. Stands of tools waited. Cameras on tripods pointed toward the Soviet tank like silent witnesses. A Panzer III rolled forward, engine whining, exhaust puffing white. Lieutenant Franz Olbrecht, a test officer with dust permanently etched into the lines of his face, watched the 34 with guarded fascination. "Looks like a barn door mated with a plough," he muttered. "But I would rather be inside that barn door than in one of ours right now." Von Grohn shot him a look. "German steel does not need envy," Mahler answered gently. nor does it fear learning. A signal was given, chains were loosened, a crane groaned, and the tank thudded onto the testing pad. The sound resonated like a church bell marking a funeral. First came the exterior inspection, measuring caliper jaws, scraped steel, rulers tapped, welds, chalk-marked armor angles. An officer called out numbers: glacis 45 mm nominal, effective thickness, roughly 90 at this slope. Pens scratched. Then came the cutting. Torches spat fire. Orange sparks rained. Smoke curled upward as armor groaned under heat. The first plate dropped with a metallic howl, exposing the interior stark, crude, purposeful. Cast turret walls bore hammer marks. Wires ran like veins, unpolished and exposed. Boxes of shells sat wedged beneath a gun breech scarred by rough machining. Albrecht whistled. No polish, no elegance. Mahler leaned in, eyes narrowing with respect. No waste. Every surface says, build quickly, fight now. They removed the V-12 diesel next. Grease coated everything. Soviet engineers had left fingerprints in oil. The marks still smudged the block. Mahler inhaled the sharp scent of fuel. Aluminum crankcase, he murmured. Light, clever, and diesel remarkably safe for battle. Fewer fires than gasoline. Von Groen frowned. Our Maybach engines are refined machines. Mahler did not disagree. Refined and precious. This engine is inevitable. Simpler castings, fewer delicate tolerances. He wiped grime from the injector pump. A blacksmith could service this, a farmer. Cutting continued. Panels fell. The tank's skeleton revealed itself. Leaf spring suspension blocks chunky, overbuilt, forgiving. Road wheels wide and solid. No delicate bogies, no labyrinth of little parts. Rehfeld, arriving late from Berlin, observed quietly. With our Panzers, a pebble in the tracks causes trouble. With this, it would chew the stone and keep moving. Von Groen's jaw tightened. We have better optics, better radios, better gunnery standards. True, Mahler said, but they have clearly chosen what matters for them. Armor, firepower, mobility, speed of manufacture. A shrug from Albrecht. Quantity has quality of its own. Everyone heard, the truth vibrating behind the words. It tasted like iron in the air. They fired test shots by noon, pack shells cracking across the range. Impact flashes sparkled against sloped steel. At 30 degrees off axis, rounds skittered. At 50 meters, one finally punched through, but the tank shuddered and sat stubbornly upright, like a wounded bull refusing to fall. Rehfeld spoke softly. Imagine hundreds of these in a blizzard, thousands, every month. Mahler responded, almost whispering. They do not need beauty. They need victory through volume. Von Groen exhaled, frost billowing from his breath. Then we must answer with better machinery. Mahler looked at the 34's stripped hull, a brutal poem in steel and weld scars. Or we must answer with more machinery, he murmured. And for that, we need a different Germany. The wind lifted, scattering torch smoke across the proving yard. Behind it, the Soviet tank stood open like an autopsy, truth laid, bare. The cold settled deeper. The men of Waproof sex did not yet say the thought forming in each mind, but it lived there, heavy as the grey sky. We have met the future, and it wears red paint and weld spatter. Snow drifted sideways through the East Prussian pines, soft flakes whispering against barbed wire and concrete. Deep inside the Wolfschanze, beneath timber beams darkened by pipe smoke and coal dust, a different kind of storm gathered, one of paper, argument, and uneasy revelation. A fire snapped in an iron stove. Maps lay unrolled across a heavy oak table. Diagrams of armor angles, cross-sections of diesel engines, production estimates written in precise script. And in the center, like a wound in the heart of German confidence, labeled photographs of the Soviet 34 dissected at Kummersdorf. Oberst Heinz Breuer of the General Staff adjusted his spectacles. Reports from Waproof sex confirm it. Sloped armor, simple suspension, wide tracks, cast turret, production efficiency prioritized over refinement. General Feldmarschall Wilhelm Keitel's jaw tightened. Our Panzer factories cannot simply turn into Soviet tractor plants overnight. No, Herr Feldmarschall, Breuer replied softly, but the Soviets already have tractor plants, and they build tanks in them. Silence settled like snow dust. At the far end of the table, Colonel Albrecht Geyer Liaison from Berlin's Armored Design Office placed a gloved hand on a blueprint. The 34 is not superior in every way. Weak optics, two-man turret, crude ergonomics. No radio in many units. Hitler, hunched forward in his brown tunic, eyes hooded and fever bright, tapped the blueprint with 2 fingers. Then it is inferior. This panic is unnecessary. The Russian machine is, he searched for a word, clumsy. Mahler, seated quietly against the wall like a tolerated intruder, spoke for the first time. Mein Führer, he began carefully, clumsiness is an advantage if it means speed of production. They design for volume, not delicacy. For winter, not parades. Hitler's gaze snapped to him, sharp as a knife. We defeated the French in 6 weeks. We encircled Minsk and Smolensk. The Russians will collapse as well. Breuer's knuckles whitened around a pointer. And yet, they did not collapse. They fell back behind rivers. And these machines appeared in increasing numbers. Intelligence estimates place Soviet monthly output approaching 1,000 vehicles and rising. Hitler scoffed. Propaganda. Mahler reached into a leather portfolio and withdrew a stained steel plate cut from the 34's glacis. He laid it on the table. The metal gleamed dull and menacing in the lamplight. Angle is everything, Mahler murmured. This plate laughs at 50mm shells. It is steel shaped like mathematics. Keitel exhaled sharply. We cannot retool factories mid-campaign. Breuer's voice remained steady. If we do not adapt, we will drown in these machines. Their design, simple welds, castings, diesel block means untrained labor can build them. And their industry relocates east beyond our reach. A log popped in the stove, sparks hissing. Outside, guards shifted boots in the snow, rifles slung numb-fingered. Hitler drummed fingers on the table, eyes fixed somewhere beyond the walls. We have our answer. The Panther project will continue. A superior German tank will defeat this Soviet design. Precision, engineering excellence, that is our path. Mahler hesitated, then spoke low. Precision costs time. Every month of perfecting tolerances gives the Soviets another 1,000 machines. Hitler's stare fixed on him again, colder now. Germany does not fight with numbers. Germany fights with destiny. The words hung, brittle as icicles. Keitel cleared his throat. Then the directive stands. Continue heavy development, no diluting effort to imitate Soviet crude construction. Breuer bowed his head obedient, but the fear in his eyes betrayed him. Jawohl. Meeting, adjourned, maps rolled, chairs scraped. Boots thudded down stone corridors. Outside, snow muffled the world. Mahler lingered a moment by the stove, rubbing grease-blackened fingers. Rehfeld, waiting near the door, whispered, "What did we just witness?" Mahler's answer was quiet, but it trembled with dread. A nation choosing elegance over survival. Rehfeld's breath clouded the cold corridor as they stepped into the pine-shadowed courtyard. Overhead, ravens flapped through the snow-thick sky like bad omens. "Do you think we can out-engineer them?" Rehfeld asked. Mahler stared eastward, toward a continent swallowed by winter and steel. "We are drafting blueprints," he said softly, "and they are forging hammers. A distant rumble artillery from practice grounds, or thunder from the coming storm rolled across the frozen forest. The wolf's lair returned to silence, but the truth remained, heavy and inescapable. The Soviets were building victory in factories, one welded plate at a time, while Germany argued over perfection in the snowbound dark. The thaw came late that year, reluctant and angry. Snow turned to slush, slush to mud, mud to sucking bog, as the Ukrainian spring tore winter from the ground with claws of water and thawing roots. The air smelled of thawed corpses and diesel exhaust. Steam curled up from earth whenever the sun dared touch it. Major Otto Rehfeld wiped grime from his goggles and peered across the shell-marked field. Beside him, Panzer III and Panzer IV crews stood smoking in silence, watching as a Soviet counterattack churned the horizon into motion. Black specks emerged, first heavy silhouettes, squat, angular, purposeful, 34s. Many of them. Same shape we saw in Minsk, murmured Feldwebel Kolbe, now assigned to a frontline maintenance detachment to observe Soviet armor behavior in combat. Rehfeld nodded grimly. And twice as many. The Germans had retaken Kharkov in a brutal winter counterstroke led by Manstein's steel-edged genius and SS shock battalions obsessed with honor and annihilation. Yet even victory tasted like iron and dread. The steppe felt endless again. The enemy, inexhaustible. Tanks flared into view, row after row, snow-matted winter camouflage streaked with thawed mud. A column rolled over a ridge, engines growling like an approaching avalanche. The ground quivered, their hulls shone with wet frost. Their guns, short-barreled, brutal, swung in unison toward the German line. Lieutenant Franz Albrecht lowered his field glasses. There must be 30. No, 50. And that is just one wave, Rehfeld replied. His voice sounded too calm. A lie, he told himself. Panzer commanders hurried to vehicles. Engines cranked, gears shrieked, exhaust sputtered white like frightened breath. Overhead, a Henschel. Observation plane buzzed, its pilot's voice crackling in the radio net. Panzerverband expected from northeast. Multiple enemy armor battalions. Prepare positions. Positions? The ground was swamp. No trenches, just mud and death. Kolbe exhaled sharply. We have 8 operational tanks. 8 against many dozens. Then came the sound, the harsh, staccato bark of diesel engines revving under strain. The 34s fanned out, suspensions flexing eagerly over thawing earth. Their tracks bit deep but never bogged. Mud flew in fat arcs. No struggling, no spinning. Panzer IV turrets whined as they swung to meet the threat. German loaders rammed armor-piercing rounds home. Gunners drew beads carefully, breathing slow. The first cannon cracked Pack 43 at 200 meters. The round struck a 34's glacis at a wicked angle. Sparks spat. The shell screamed skyward. Ricochet turned to humiliation. One of the German gunners cursed in disbelief. Angle. Again. Angle. A Panzer IV fired. Direct hit to the turret cheek flash. Clang, no penetration. The Soviet tank barely rocked. It continued. Gun leveling, muzzle flash yawning like the mouth of a furnace. The German tank erupted in a plume of flame and steel fragments. Kolbe whispered. They shrug off hits like gods. Rehfeld spoke through clenched teeth. They shrug off ours, but theirs. He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Another 34 round punched through a Panzer III, the turret flying off in a grotesque arc as if ripped by invisible claws. Mud and black smoke showered the field. Men screamed. The smell of burning flesh drowned the thawed earth odor. The Soviet tanks pushed harder, closing the distance, firing while moving. Their hulls rocked. Their guns belched fire with savage rhythm. The sound was an iron hammer beating on the world. Rehfeld signaled his radio operator. Smoke! Lay smoke! Fall back by bounds! The Germans complied. Smoke! Pots hissed. Curtains of grey unfurled, like a dying god's breath. Engines roared in reverse, clattering, whining, choking in mud. Some bogged, track teeth slipping helplessly. Soviet tanks advanced without slowing. Then came the infantry waves of Red Army soldiers riding the backs of tanks like ironclad cavalry, sliding down armor skirts, rifles ready. They flowed forward, shouting guttural battle cries, boots sloshing, bayonets fixed. Soviet artillery thundered behind them, shells exploding like wet thunder in the marshland. Rehfeld crouched behind the smoking ruin of a Panzer IV and watched a 34 crest a ridge, hull dripping, spring melt like sweat. Its tracks crushed, churned earth and mangled men alike. Its turret machine gun raked a German machine gun nest, turning it into a red smear. Kolbe's voice carried quiet awe, terror, and reluctant admiration. "They are not tanks," he said. "They are plows, cutting the war open." A panicked German tank crew abandoned their bogged Panzer, sprinting toward the rear. A 34 pivoted, its wide tracks slicing mud cleanly, and a burst of fire reduced the fleeing men to twitching shapes in steaming snow. Rehfeld's stomach turned. They mass them. They do not care for losses. They think like factories. He paused as a shell detonated close, spraying dirt and bone. When the blast cleared, he murmured like a man reciting a prayer gone sour. "They build enough to replace everyone we kill." The line buckled. A final smoke barrage billowed, NCOs dragging wounded, engines screaming. By dusk, the battlefield lay mottled with burning German armor like black tombstones. Soviet machines idled on the high ground, victory silhouettes against a blood-pink sky. Rehfeld wiped ash from his face. "We fought their tank," he said hollowly. "Today we fought their industry." Kolbe nodded, eyes haunted. "And industry does not bleed like men." The wind howled across the steppe, carrying the smell of diesel and thaw. Somewhere beyond the smoke, Soviet engines rumbled, still patient, endless, inevitable. And as darkness fell, one truth echoed louder than artillery in every German mind. The 34 was not just a weapon, it was a promise. And the promise was numbers. Rain hammered the corrugated roofs of the Nibelungenwerk factory, turning the yard into a grey, shivering mirror. Assembly sheds ran in long parallel rows like ribs of some industrial leviathan. Steam rose from vents. Whistles shrieked, hammers rang. Even so, the place felt strained, stretched thin, like a man breathing too fast. Diplom-Ingenieur Friedrich Mahler stepped onto the concrete floor, boots splashed with Austrian mud. The air smelled of hot steel, cutting oil, and the faint sweetness of antifreeze. Sparks cascaded from welding bays, lighting clouds of smoke in orange halos. Panzer IV hulls rested on blocks. Turrets queued like crownless kings. Workers, men in threadbare coats, women, with kerchiefs tied tight, Czech labourers under guard moved in ceaseless rhythm. Yet compared to Soviet plants Mahler had studied, it felt delicate. Every part measured twice, edges polished, weld beads neat and courteous. A foreman approached, clipboard in hand. "Herr Ingenieur," he said, nodding grimly. "We are at maximum throughput." His fingers drummed the wooden board as if counting ghosts. 200 tanks per month, on paper, but with parts shortages, labour changes, air raid interruptions, real output is closer to 140. Mahler's gaze drifted down the line. Workers fitted road wheels with careful precision. "And the Soviets," he murmured, "produce 1,234s in the same time." The foreman laughed, once bitter, sharp. "We build watches with guns. They build hammers with engines." A siren wailed briefly, test only, and in its echo, distant artillery thunder rolled like a memory. Somewhere far east, tanks met in fire again. Mahler adjusted his spectacles. "Let us walk." They moved through the plant. Cranes rumbled overhead, lowering turret rings. Inspectors tapped hulls with brass hammers, listening for sound more than sight. The rhythm was slow, deliberate, almost loving. Love had no place in war manufacturing. At one line, a supervisor halted Mahler. "Observe," he said proudly. 2 welders leaned over a hull seam, beads smooth and even. German craftsmanship. "We have standards." Mahler nodded, then quietly replied, "Standards do not stop shells." He touched the steel hull, cold and elegant. "We reward perfection. They reward quantity." A silence, thick as grease formed. He continued, "In Kharkov, I saw 10 of ours destroyed by 30 of theirs. Then 30 more arrived, as if conjured. A tooling engineer nearby overheard and stiffened. But our tanks are superior," he protested bitterly. "Better optics, better gun stabilization, radios in all, command vehicles." Mahler looked at him with tired eyes. A dead tanker does not praise his periscope. The engineer's mouth opened, then shut. In a side office, steam hissing from radiators, senior officials sat around a long oak table. Schematics lay spread like maps of a failing empire. Coffee cups steamed. Exhaustion etched every face. Oberst Albrecht Geyer tapped a pencil against a chart. Panther program progressing. Complex transmission issues, final drive problems, overheating risk. But once refined, Mahler echoed softly. How long? Geyer hesitated. 6 months. Perhaps 1 year for full reliability. Mahler set down a folder. Inside lay photographs from Soviet factories, Stalingrad tractor plant before siege, Ural tank plants after relocation. Workers in fur coats operating presses, tank hulls stacked like firewood, crude weld seams glowing red. He spoke without raising his voice. While we perfect one machine, they perfect volume. They build enough tanks to lose half and still advance. General Oberst Heinz Eberbach, visiting armored commander, leaned forward. We need quality to meet them. No, Mahler answered gently. We need numbers to stand long enough for quality to matter. Somewhere outside, a hammer dropped. The sound echoed like a verdict. An SS procurement officer sneered. You would have us copy Bolshevik steel barns? If barns win wars, Mahler said softly. Yes. The officer flushed. We are not peasants. We are not winning, Mahler replied. The room chilled despite steaming radiators. Later, Mahler returned to the assembly line. A young mechanic, 16 at most, cheeks still round with youth tightened bolts on a final drive. Sweat gleamed under fluorescent lamps. He worked carefully, reverently, pausing to check torque values twice. Mahler crouched. Your name, lad? Lucas, Herr Ingenieur. Why so careful, Lucas? The boy looked confused. It must be perfect. It carries our men. Mahler felt a great ache in his chest. What if good enough saves more men than perfect but few? The boy blinked, uncomprehending. He turned back to his bolts with earnest obedience. Perfect. Loyal. Slow. Mahler whispered. And that is why they will drown us. Outside, rain thickened to sleet as a Panther prototype rumbled in the yard, new, imposing, sharp-edged like ambition cast in steel. Its turret traversed smoothly, cannon gleaming under floodlights. Engineers admired, officers smiled, thin smiles. Then, a Soviet T-34 carcass brought for comparative testing was dragged beside it. Welds ugly as scar tissue, armor pitted, paint crude. A machine born in haste, built by hands that knew hunger and winter. Beside it, the Panther looked like a cathedral next to a barn. Geyer nodded proudly. See? German superiority. Mahler stared at the two machines, sleet pattering on both hulls. One is a masterpiece, he murmured. The other is a miracle by the thousands. A Panzer officer nearby asked quietly, Which would you bet a war on? Mahler breathed in cold air, sharp as knives. In 1939, he answered. The masterpiece. And now? Mahler exhaled. The miracle. As evening fog rolled in, assembly whistles blew. Workers streamed out, boots splashing through puddles, heads low. The factory lights glowed through mist like trapped stars. Somewhere a train whistle moaned another shipment of panzers outbound to a front that devoured steel faster than prayers. Kolbe appeared beside Mahler, coat dripping sleet. You returned from the east with ghosts, he said. Not ghosts, Mahler replied. Math. Kolbe shivered. Not from cold. And what does the math say? Mahler watched sparks fly from a welding bay like brief lives burning bright. It says a tide has risen, he whispered. And we are sandbags. The wind keened, across the yard. Distant thunder, maybe artillery practice, maybe storm rolled low across the Danube plain. The Soviets did not yet stand at the gates of Berlin, but in Mahler's eyes the future already glimmered in steel and snow. And on that rainy Austrian day, Beneath the roar of German industry straining to mimic a miracle of scale, one truth echoed louder than machines. They were not merely building tanks, they were building inevitability. Dawn broke not as light, but as vibration. A low tremor, subtle at first, rippled through the ground like a heartbeat deep within the soil. Then another, and another. Birds burst from the trees in frantic flocks. Horses stamped, snorted, rolled eyes white with instinctive dread. Mist clung to the low scrub around Orel, thick enough to taste wet chalk and cordite residue from yesterday's artillery preparations. The steppe shivered, waiting to be torn open. Hauptmann Otto Rehfeld adjusted his binoculars. The horizon looked bruise-purple, early sun smothered under smoke haze. Panzer crews crouched beside turret skirts, heating tins of ersatz coffee over small stoves. Men smoked with mechanical repetition. 2 whispered prayers. 1 retched quietly behind a track. Kolbe wiped grease from his hands onto already black trousers, checking road wheels on a Panzer IV. "Transmission whining again," he muttered. "We push it at full throttle in this heat. She'll seize." He kicked a sprocket tooth. Metal thudded, dull, tired. Rehfeld nodded grimly. Everything is tired. Men, engines, even the air. Kolbe squinted eastward. "They say this is the final push. Decisive battle. Break them here, and we—" A distant thunder rolled across the plain. Not artillery, something larger, deeper, more mechanical. It swelled like an approaching storm front with tracks. Men stood, still as statues, straining ears. Then shapes emerged through the fog. Dark bulks, dozens, then scores. 34s. Row after row. Lines, bending the horizon into a steel tide. The mist lifted as if pulled by invisible strings. Sunlight bled over steel hulls coated in crude green paint, mud spattered, shovel handles tied with wire, spare links dangling like teeth. Above them fluttered red pennants, stark against grey sky. Infantry clung to engine decks, faces smeared with soot, bayonets catching light. Kolbe swallowed hard. "Mother of mercy," Rehfeld spoke softly, like a man translating a prophecy he wished he didn't understand. "Tanks should not come in forests or waves," he murmured. "But they come like weather now." He turned to his radio operator. "Signal all units. Contact front. Prepare to engage." Engines growled to life. Panzer exhaust formed ghost trails. Turrets clanked as guns depressed and aligned. But the sound of German steel felt small, thin, swallowed by the roar growing across the steppe. A lieutenant yelled across the line, voice cracking. "Where do they all come from?" Mahler had told him weeks earlier, softly, like a confession, from every furnace they could light, from every hand that could weld, from the idea that numbers are victory. A red flare streaked skyward Soviet signal. The 34s surged forward. The ground shook. The Battle of Kursk had begun for them in mud and fear. German guns barked first, shells racing low. A 34 at the vanguard shuddered, turret face erupting, but it kept coming, like a bull hit in the skull who did not yet know it was dying. A second round struck, penetrating only at near-kiss distance. Flames finally gouted from hatches. 5 more took its place. A pack crew opened fire, loaders screaming numbers. The second gun jammed after 3 rounds. A Soviet tank crushed its position moments later, track grinding bone and timber into red pulp. Kolbe's Panzer fired once, twice. A 34 spun, smoke pouring, turret hatch flinging open as a crewman leapt out aflame, running 5 steps before falling, silent. But 2 more swung guns toward Kolbe's tank. "Reverse!" Kolbe shouted, voice cracking. The gearbox screeched, gears protested. The tank lurched back like a wounded animal. A shell slammed the glacis, armor ringing like a bell struck by God's hammer. Rivets popped. The commander inside screamed at the shock. Soviet infantry dismounted, racing low behind hulls. They moved with grim discipline, now no longer crude masses. They learned. They adapted. They were many. An SS unit countercharged on half-tracks, machine guns slicing air. Soviets fell, but for every one who fell, 2 took his rifle. The world dissolved into tracers, mud, screams, metal shrieks. Rehfeld ducked as a 34's cannon flash bloomed close. Dirt rained. He peeked, heart pounding like a drum in a tomb. Soviet armor rolled around the flanks like wolves encircling cattle. "Where are our reserves?" he shouted. The radio crackled. "Committed elsewhere. You must hold. Hold. Against a steel river fed by a continent." Kolbe's voice screamed through the smoke. "They don't stop. They don't stop for anything." Rehfeld suddenly remembered Mahler's words at Nibelungenwerk. "They are not building tanks. They are building inevitability." A Stuka screamed overhead, but only one. Anti-air bursts peppered the sky. The plane groaned into a dive, dropped one bomb, then spiraled trailing smoke. The Luftwaffe was now a rumor in daylight. A fresh Soviet wave rolled forward, new tanks, clean paint, reinforcements as if conjured. Germany threw elite Panzer divisions into this furnace and saw them melt into slag. The Soviets fed iron and blood in equal measure and grew stronger. Rehfeld watched another Panzer brew up. The crew burned, trapped inside, pounding the hatch until flames silenced them. His stomach churned. Kolbe shouted, voice raw, "We cannot kill them fast enough." Rehfeld whispered back, "They do not need to stop. They just need to keep coming." A 34 rammed a German anti-tank pit, collapsing it with raw mass. Its hull rode up and over, steel dominating dirt by simple arithmetic of weight and will. Suddenly, the radio screamed, "Soviet reserves committed more than 100 tanks advancing." Someone laughed. Hysterical. Broken. The ground quaked under Soviet treads, as if creation itself marched. A flash, a thunderclap, then another. Panzer turrets blew like tin cans struck by dynamite. Shrapnel sliced men to ribbons. The steppe became a foundry. Fire, smoke, molten iron. Rehfeld dropped into a trench as machine gun rounds shredded air above. He pressed his face into freezing mud. The earth tasted like rust and fear. He spoke into the dirt, not to be heard, but because truth demanded witness. "It is not courage we lack," he whispered. "It is factories." Kolbe slid beside him, panting, face black with soot. "Then this war was decided long before we reached this field." The horizon flickered orange, like a forge lit by giants. Rehfeld closed his eyes as shells screamed overhead. "No," he said softly. "It was decided the moment they learned to make 1,000 tanks a month." Steel roared. Earth trembled. Men bled. Industry marched. And somewhere beyond the smoke, beyond the dying sun of German armor, the future rolled forward on wide tracks and diesel hearts unstoppable, inevitable, Soviet. Snow fell like sifted ash over Kummersdorf. Pines drooped under white burden, and the air held that peculiar stillness only deep winter grants when even the world's breath seems held. Yet inside the proving ground, silence was a memory. Engines roared. Steel clanged. Arguments crackled sharper than frost. A Panther Ausführung D sat on a frozen pad, steam curling from its exhaust like breath from a tired bull. Its hull paint, dark yellow with olive stripes, gleamed fresh, almost proud. Workers stood ready with notebooks, fuel cans, and pry bars. Engineers huddled in overcoats, faces wind-chapped, brows furrowed not from cold but frustration. Diplom-Ingenieur Friedrich Mahler arrived, boots crunching on ice. Kolbe followed, limping slightly from shrapnel earned near Orel, his breath visible in sharp bursts. Major Otto Rehfeld joined them, face lean, eyes haunted by fields of fire and rolling steel. The test officer saluted stiffly. "Herr Ingenieur, the new transmission assembly is ready." Mahler nodded. "Begin." The Panther's Maybach HL 230-08 engine growled to life. Throttle opened, treads bit into ice, churning snow into powder. The tank rolled forward, smooth, graceful, a predator's glide. Then a shriek, a grinding pop, a metallic crack that sounded like bones snapping. The Panther lurched to a halt, turret rocking. A mechanic cursed. Final drive failure. Another muttered. Third one this month. Kolbe spat into the snow. A horse will not run if you build its legs from spun glass. Mahler removed his glove, touched the hull warm under snow crust. The design is sound, he whispered. In theory. Rehfeld's voice cut through the air, weary and edged with battlefield bluntness. Theory does not pull burnt men from turrets. Mahler said nothing. He could not argue. He had seen too many Panthers abandoned, too many engines seized, too many transmissions shattered by the demands of real war, 80 millimeters of sloped armor, a cannon that could kill a 34 frontally at 1,000 meters, optics like jeweler's glass. And yet, a war machine is only as strong as its weakest bolt, and bolts break. A Wehrmacht logistics officer, coat buttoned to the throat, approached, holding a clipboard thick as the Book of Job. Herr Ingenieur, he said, your Panther requires over 700 man-hours to assemble. The 34 requires 280. Ours uses alloy steel, precision bearings, and late-war fuel mixtures. Theirs uses manganese steel, wide, tolerances, and whatever fuel burns. He tapped the board. They patch theirs with hammers. We patch ours with prayers. Mahler asked quietly. How many Panthers operational on the Eastern Front today? The officer swallowed. Less than 50%. Many immobile for maintenance. And 34s? The officer's eyes darkened. They lose 1 battalion. 2 more arrive. He shut his ledger. We have built the most elegant sword in history. They have built a factory that makes hammers faster than swordsmen can swing. A burst of wind swept the grounds, rattling tools, lifting snow in swirling ghosts. Somewhere, a worker coughed through wool scarf. Another lit a cigarette with hands trembling from cold and exhaustion. Flakes landed on steel and hissed as they touched still warm armor. Rehfeld watched the crippled Panther. In Orel, he said, I saw 34s drive through positions they should not have survived. Tanks on fire still, advancing 20 meters before stopping. Crews dying inside, and the machine kept moving. Kolbe nodded. Because the machine was simple enough to endure abuse, and cheap enough to waste. Mahler looked skyward, where grey clouds hung low like a lid sealing winter over Germany. Do you remember Warsaw, before the war? He asked suddenly. The department stores, the trams, the factories ringing with modern pride. Rehfeld frowned. Why? Because I believed then that we were entering an age where precision would conquer. Precision engines. Precision strategy. He exhaled a long plume of frost. But war rewards not precision. War rewards repetition. Kolbe rubbed his scarred knuckles. War rewards who shows up tomorrow with more tanks than today. Snow thickened. Flakes clung to eyelashes. The world blurred white at the edges. A junior engineer approached, clutching blueprints. His voice shook slightly with cold, or the moment. If we simplify the waste, gearbox, reduce machining requirements, re-engineer the wheel stations. Mahler raised a hand. Yes, we know what must be done. But by the time we do it, Rehfeld finished softly, the Soviets will be in Warsaw, then Vienna, then Berlin. The junior engineer stared at his boots as though answers might lie under snow. A klaxon sounded. Another Panther rolled out of a hangar, fresh paint gleaming, workers guiding it like midwives. It looked magnificent, long, sleek, deadly. A predator built by men who believed beauty and power could win alone. Mahler admired it despite his despair. This is a masterpiece, he whispered. Kolbe's reply came like a hammer on anvil. And we need a miracle. Rehfeld's breath turned to mist. No, we need 1,000 miracles per month. There it was. No metaphor, no poetry, just mathematics written in frost and blood. A chill deeper than weather settled in Mahler's bones. He spoke to no one and everyone. When we captured that first 34 near Minsk, we admired its flaws. We should have feared their answer to those flaws. And what was their answer? Kolbe asked. Mahler smiled bitterly. Speed. Simplicity. Quantity. A mechanic banged open a toolbox, the clang ringing like a church bell. Rehfeld adjusted his cap. Perfection is a luxury. Victory is urgent. Snow swirled. The damaged panther steamed, still and wounded, like a magnificent animal too proud to admit it was dying. Mahler exhaled. We are designing the future, he said softly, while fighting men who mass-produce the present. Kolbe's gloved hand rested on the frozen hull. Then the present will kill us first. The Panther's engine sputtered, coughed, died. Silence returned. Heavy, honest. Winter pressed against Germany's war industry, but a deeper frost had already settled the knowledge that time, not courage, would choose the victor. And time was counted not in genius or pride, but in welding, sparks, foundry heat, and the rhythm of assembly lines in distant, snowy steppes. And in that moment, surrounded by broken steel and falling snow, they finally understood. They were not losing to a tank. They were losing to a factory. The Reich Chancellery conference room was warm when it should have been cold, bright when winter Berlin outside sat grey and shivering. Heat blasted from radiators fed by coal that civilians in Friedrichshain could no longer afford to burn. Painted eagles stared down from panelling polished obsessively by men who no longer had time to believe in shine. On the long oak table, spread like offerings, lay cutaway models of gearboxes, sections of armor plate, metallurgical samples labeled in neat Gothic script. Diplom-Ingenieur Friedrich Mahler sat stiffly, hands folded, coat damp from the snow he had shaken off only minutes before. To his right sat Kolbe, one arm in a sling from a factory accident the week prior. Across sat Oberst Rehfeld, summoned from the Eastern Front for technical consultation, though his gaunt frame made clear the front had already taken much of him. He looked as though sleep had become rumour. The door opened with a dry groan. Field Marshal Keitel entered first, eyes red-rimmed, followed by two officers from Waproof 6, then a civilian in a fur collar whose shoes gleamed like lacquer. Albert Speer arrived last, coat immaculate, gaze sharp as a drafting compass. This meeting, Speer announced without preamble, is to resolve the Panther question and its implications for the Panzerwaffe. Resolve. As if problems obeyed. Vocabulary. He gestured to the samples on the table. We face a contradiction. We have created what is, on paper and in duel, the finest tank in the world. Yet our losses mount. Our output lags. At current rates, we will never regain initiative in the East. Mahler heard the unspoken word. Never. A colonel from Waproof 6 adjusted his spectacles. We have received field, reports of final drive failures, turret traverse malfunctions in cold weather, and difficulty operating the Maybach HL230 at extreme temperatures. Rehfeld snorted softly. Field reports call them winter coffins. The colonel bristled. Exaggeration. Tell that, Rehfeld replied calmly. To the men burned alive when the transmission locks during withdrawal. Keitel's fist struck the table, wood vibrating. We will not indulge defeatism. Silence. Cold, despite the steam heat. Speer folded his hands. We have studied Soviet production. The 34 is stamped, welded, simplified. 1,200 units monthly by late 1943. They accept imperfections because quantity corrects quality. A flawed tank still shoots, a late tank shoots never. Kolbe leaned forward. We warned, in Minsk. The machine is crude because the system behind it is elegant. Speed, steel, scale. Keitel's voice cut. We are Germans. We do not build tractors. Mahler's reply slipped out before caution could intervene. Perhaps we should have built tractors first, and tanks second. A single tick of the ornate wall clock sounded like thunder. Speer intervened. Our resources shrink. Alloy supplies dwindle. Labor shortages worsen. We must reduce machining operations, simplify suspension, remove non-essential fittings, and reform the industrial base. The Waproof colonel frowned. Simplification will compromise battlefield superiority. Rehfeld's laugh was a sound of someone beyond caring. Superiority? On what battlefield? Show me where we outnumber Soviets. Show me where we outproduce them. Show me where our tank crews receive 100 hours training before combat. No one replied. Mahler opened a folder. Inside were sketches labeled Einfacher Panzer Program, the Simplified Tank Program, a welded hull, leaf spring or Christie suspension, reduced optics, a diesel license, proposal, something painful, something German only by necessity, a tank that could be built fast. Keitel looked as though shown a farmhouse after living in a palace. Unacceptable. The Führer demands weapons that inspire fear, Kolbe answered, almost gently. Fear is born of presence, Herr Feldmarschall, not perfection. 100 good tanks replaced every month frighten armies. 10 masterpieces frighten historians. Speer's jaw tightened. The Führer remains convinced the answer is heavier armament. The Tiger too. Mahler felt the room tilt. We cannot maintain the Tiger. Its final drives tear themselves apart. It takes 5 days of train logistics per battalion to fuel. In snow, its weight sinks to the hull. How do we scale such a machine? Keitel's gaze hardened. By will. Rehfeld leaned forward so the table groaned. Will does not dry gear oil at -30. Will does not prevent mud swallowing a 70-ton hull. Will does not train a 19-year-old conscript to fight Guards tank brigades. Speer cut in quickly. Enough. We must choose. He raised a hand, fingers long and steady as drawing tools. Path 1. Continue perfection. Build fewer. Hope tactical brilliance offsets numerical inferiority. He lifted another finger. Path 2. Radical simplification. Abandon certain luxuries. Produce for scale. No one spoke. Outside, a distant siren wailed, not an air raid, simply factory shift change. Berlin still pretended. The war-proof colonel finally murmured, If we simplify, we admit inferiority. Mahler answered quietly, If we refuse, we guarantee defeat. Speer turned to Keitel. The Führer? The Führer, Keitel said, has chosen the Tiger II and advances of the Panther. He will hear no talk of compromise. The stamped drawings of Mahler's simple tank seemed to sag under their own weight. Rehfeld whispered, Then we are building monuments, not weapons. Keitel rose. This meeting is concluded. Speer lingered. When only Mahler, Kolbe and Rehfeld remained, he spoke in a low voice. You three understand the war differently than the men upstairs. I cannot change the Führer's mind today. He paused. But keep your designs, keep your notes. We may yet need machines built by necessity rather than pride. He left. Mahler closed his folder slowly, as though burying a child's coffin. Kolbe stared at the polished table. They want to win by proclamation. Rehfeld adjusted his cap. Wars are won by factories, not speeches. The three men walked into the marble hallway. Their footsteps echoed like far-off artillery. Outside, snow drifted past stone eagles. Smoke from distant chimneys smeared the sky. Berlin glimmered faintly, vainly a chandelier lit in a burning house. Mahler buttoned his coat. We saw the future at Kummersdorf, he said. And we chose the past. Kolbe nodded. The 34 teaches a lesson. We refuse to learn. Rehfeld's voice was tired steel. Simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. They stepped into the cold, where breath fogged and boots bit ice. In the east, beyond forests and rivers and graves, Soviet plants poured flame into sky. Tanks rolled from welding jigs to railcars in hours, not days. War had become arithmetic, and Germany had chosen poetry.